I'm Johanna Svanikia, and welcome to the HACSA webinar series, where we bring people from Africa and the diaspora to discuss important topical issues. I want to thank our technical team for making these webinars possible. The title today is How Do We Heal from Half a Millennium of Collective Trauma? Before we start, I'd like to pay tribute to Congressman Lewis, who passed on yesterday.
Yeah.
A great oak tree has fallen, and I had a very personal experience with Congressman Lewis myself. So a few years back, I was walking through the tunnels of the House of Congress, and as I was walking through, he was walking in the opposite direction, and I was just thrilled to see him. But I expected him to look at me blankly, because I sometimes experience that. When I was a teenager, I went to England for the first time after living in Africa. And every time I saw a Ghanaian or even an African or Caribbean person, I would be so excited. But then they would look blankly at me, possibly because I didn't look African. And so I'm used to that. But when I saw Congressman Lewis, he just looked at me like, hello, sister, without saying a word. And that was a very, very moving moment for me. We just walked by then, but I really treasured that moment. Later on, I met him at the Ghanaian House of Parliament, and it was at a dinner hosted by the Ghanaian Speaker of Parliament, and that was just about 6-7 months ago. And again, he was so warm and such a kind person, very, very humble, and not aware at all about how thrilled I was to meet him. He has been a light and an inspiration for what we do at HACSA, and I think one of the most important people who lived in terms of the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. So today we just want to mention what a loss it is to lose him, and may he rest in peace. So going to the webinar, as I mentioned, we have the topic and our panelists here today. So the title today is How Do We Heal from Half a Millennium of Collective Trauma? And I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Joel Ruffin, Dr. Margaret Spearman, and Dr. Angel Acosta to address this question after introducing themselves. So Mr. Joel Ruffin, could you please go first?
Yes, I'd like to say hello to everyone, and it is a pleasure and an honor to be with you today, and to Ambassador Savanika and the HACSA family. Just in a way of, my personal journey in being reconnected with the continent and my peoples through HACSA, through Ambassador Savanika and my colleague GT at the firm where we work in New York, and my life and our lives, my life, my family's life has never been the same. And so today, so just a little bit of background, I'm a senior vice president at an investment bank in New York City. I've been in technology and engineering and management for over 30 plus years. Again, very passionate about the challenges that we face as a people, particularly the African American experience in the United States. And again, so this has been kind of something that is in my heart, in my soul. So everything that I do, whether it be working, and progressing, whether it be academically or in my career, there's always a focus on how does this make a difference in the life of my people and our people. So this conversation today is near and dear to my heart, and again is an honor to be with my fellow panelists, and looking forward to a really engaging conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Dr. Margaret Spearman.
Good morning. Good morning. I think I stand in deep gratitude just for the opportunity to be a panelist today. As a woman of deep faith, a woman that has been in the academy for over 32 years, a woman who is just retired and realized that I was among the walking wounded and in a recovery process as I've left academia. And what I mean by that is that I believe part of the work is to look at oneself. And I have to look at myself as being wounded, experiencing impact from Black inferiority and white superiority. So it brings me to this place of being healed, committed to the process, but also wanting and feel like I'm being called to facilitate those processes for others, my brothers and sisters. So I stand here as a learner, open to sharing some things that I've experienced, and just feeling as if this is home. And yes, so I'm very excited about this gathering today.
Thank you very much. And now we give the floor to Dr. Angel Acosta.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We have a global community gathering here today. Thank you so much, Ambassador Svanike, for the extension, the invitation. And it's just an honor to be here. I just finished my doctoral studies recently. And so I'm celebrating, and this is an extension of that celebration. I've been in the field of education for about a decade now. Initially began helping low-income students across the United States with access to higher education, and then kind of slowly morphed into having more pedagogical experiences with social justice and mindfulness. So broadly speaking, my interest is in healing-centered education, but I am part of the diaspora by way of Dominican Republic. So I identify as an Afro-Latino, and to be fully vulnerable, my Black consciousness was something I developed just later in my life, even though I was Black all my life. And so we can talk a little bit about that later in terms of how the wounding is so deep in our communities that we don't even recognize or identify with those African roots. Ms. Svanike, I'd love to provide a little bit more context.
Please go ahead. For
this conversation. So although Dr. Spearman and Brother Ruffin and I are the quote unquote panelists, you are all panelists. This is a family affair. And I want to place this gathering in historical context from my perception. What we want to understand is this conversation is actually one conversation in a long legacy of decolonization. Decolonization in the context of in the context of the Black diaspora. So that conversations around healing in response to the last millennia of collective trauma is actually a conversation that has been happening for a long time across the diaspora. So this conversation is in the lineage of, for example, the Pan-Africanist Congress from the 1900s to 1945. In the lineage of the Negritude movement led by Leopold Sédar Senghor, Aimé Césaire, Léon Damas, incredible African dignitaries who in the 1930s began to ask, even before the Black Power movement, what it meant to have a Black consciousness. In fact, in preparation for this call, I pulled out a classic text in African literature written by Aimé Césaire, Discourse on Colonialism, written in 1955 by Aimé Césaire, and it is a powerful indictment, in particular of French colonial rule. But we want to understand that this conversation is in line of the freedom struggles of the African continent in the 20th century and the classic struggle of Black folks across the globe trying to resist white supremacy in its attempts to enslave us and extract labor from us. So it is a very special moment that we come together as part of the diaspora. Although it is digital, although we can extend our arms and hold hands, it is a very unique moment where we deal with the crisis of COVID-19 and then the crisis of structural racism that is still in place, that hits all our brothers and sisters of the Black diaspora. In the US context, many of us can't breathe. In the global context, we see how people of color and Black people are treated across the diaspora. So this conversation is in line with other conversations where people have come together and straightened their backs to ask the question, how do we heal? How do we resist? How do we recover? And I'll only say, and I'll end by saying that epigenetic research, looking at the genetic, our genes, and looking at the impact of trauma on our genes, epigeneticists have been able to now very firmly suggest that trauma can be transferred between 4 to 7, sometimes 14 generations. It's a provocative thought to hold because, ironically enough, 14 generation is exactly almost 400 to 500 years. So what does that mean for us who are part of the diaspora now and can now look back 400 years and maybe, just maybe, have the opportunity to break the traumatic spell that white supremacy has inflicted upon us by its extraction of our value, of our wealth, of our well-being. So it is with that that I frame this conversation and invite my two colleagues and some questions from the audience to begin to wrestle with what it means to heal in this moment when we still face such anti-Blackness globally.
Ooh. Wow. Angel, yes, I feel you. And I think what's paramount to the work is realizing that we're wounded. Since the age of 14, I've been facilitating conversations about race. And I realized that with each conversation that I facilitated, there was a stripe that I sustained. And not until I moved out of formal academia did I realize when I say, I see you, I hear you, I want to spend time with you, I realized I couldn't say that to myself. So I had to stop the clock. And I had to say, do I see myself and the position that I am in? Do I hear the rhythms of my soul cry out? And do I want to spend time with me? So I do believe, and I just want to put this out there, I think it starts with us. And not that we'll be healed as if there's a destination, but that we're willing to commit to the journey and we recognize and we can see that we're wounded.
That's very powerful. To Margaret and to Angel, I think my own personal journey. I always believe that context defines content. When you change the content change the context by which you're assessing, or the words we use to kind of describe ourselves. From an African American perspective, my ancestors were warriors. They overcame the most horrendous, horrific ordeal, an assault, not only on their bodies, but on the very mental, psychological image of themselves. Stripped of their language and their culture, they still overcame. So what does that say to me? That says that they are warriors. That says to me that they were incredibly resilient And the power of that is in my DNA.
Mm-hmm.
I dare not take that, and use it for me as an excuse to say I can't. They were able to do things with nothing. And if I compare what is in my hands today with what they had when they were faced with the horror of being lynched at any minute or being abused, I don't have an excuse. So I use that as the foundation. Now, then I say, well, look, I can take my time and analyze what's being done to me, and that will just take up all of my time. I understand that. But it's time that we look within and say, what are we doing to ourselves? I can't change the nature of a lion, but I can create a barrier between that lion and me, and I can focus on my space. Now, that's easier said than done. I realize that hatred, discrimination is not a color. It's a mindset. It's a human disease. So if we want to solve it, it depends on how far down you want to go. And how far down do we really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of what's happening to us, what has been taken, how do we restore that, how do we rebuild that, how do we build a greater context that takes our, things that have been done to us and turn it into an asset. Strength, not weakness. Warriors, not wounded, but empowered to move forward. We're living in a great moment right now, in a tremendous moment where we can, separate the stimulus from the response. We got to stop reacting, think strategically, and really map out a strategy that rebuilds within. If we rebuild within, nothing outside will be able to withstand that. That's my comments.
Thank you, Brother Joe. And I want to take us for about 10 more minutes, and then involve the general audience in our beautiful town hall. And I want to turn back to you, Brother Joe, and then to you, Sister Margaret. I know with Ambassador Svanniken's invitation for us to come, your anger and your rage in regards to the recent happenings was a palpable kind of motivator for this webinar. And I just wanted to create some space for you to further articulate that, even though it comes through your initial response here. But I wanted to create space for your rage and then for Sister Margaret to articulate any other feelings that are kind of surfacing.
Yeah, absolutely, Brother Angel. I think. Oh, good, Margaret. Sorry. Dr. Spearman?
Go ahead, Dr. Spearman, go ahead.
I think, I looked at the COVID-19 situation. It felt like it was time out. And then as we dealt with the uprising, the murders, for me, the message was, look where we really are. The issues we're still addressing. And I experienced sadness, great pain to say all the conversations that we've been into, but look, we're in the same place. What are we called to do? And it was a rise up. It was a rise up to say, I'm ready to move out. And for me, again, it requires me to look at myself and blemishes. And I do say the woundedness, because until I recognize that, can I draw upon and pull out the resilience. I stood a year ago, almost a year ago to this day, I stood with my niece at the door of no return at Cape Coast in Ghana. And when I've heard in the past, oh, we have to become resilient, we need the skills, I stood there and said, the resilience is here. I stand here with my niece, knowing that my ancestors were resilient people. They were warriors. What am I called to do to deliver the message that it's within us? So in response to your question, Angel, I was both sad, I was mad, and felt great pain, but I was also empowered through the tragedies to do all that I can do so that my grandchildren don't have to go through the same situation 10 years from now.
That's powerful. Dr. Spearman, I think that for me, there was initial anger because it was so blatant, so in your face, so horrific. And then I began to realize how out of touch I was with the suffering of those during the time when lynchings were just the normal course of a day. How out of touch I was to realize that was what my ancestors lived with on a daily basis. And there was no arrests. There was no justice. It was just pure fear. So I said to myself, yes, I was angry. Then I was angry at myself. Like, man, how did you get so out of touch with this? When did you think a line would change its nature? How did you get comfortable with this? So the shock and the anger was a mixture of angry at a system that will promote this, then embrace this, angry at myself that I became detached. Yeah, I read about the struggle, but do you really understand the struggle? Do you really understand what was going on? So I was talking about things, but it was not experiential. It didn't live in my mind as a neural experience, but as a bit of knowledge and information. So now, for those who are of a Christian faith, and we talk about the death of Christ and the impact of it, and I said, if it wasn't for George's sacrifice, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There would be no uprising. There would be no movement. And so, again, my response is, how do I honor him in his sacrifice? Because he sacrificed. He didn't do anything wrong. It was taken from us in front of our face. So what am I going to do with it? I have to honor that sacrifice, like we honor the sacrifice of others, and to do the things that we need to do, that we all know what we need to do, and to do it, and to honor him by taking this, and fighting the mindset and the mental disease called supremacy, the mental disease called hatred. Starting with us loving ourselves and extending love, because the greatest power in the world is love, period. Love covers a multitude of sin. And if we can rise above it and really show how grand we are as a people, that we can love and reconcile in the face of such horror, it makes us human beings. It creates that which we believe and we know that we are. I don't have to get into tribalism, and I don't have to get into hatred back. And that's just solving the problem with the same elements that have given you the problem. We need a different language. We need a much more a greater awareness of ourselves, a greater awareness to be able to deal with this. It takes a lot of deep thought, introspection, and to tap into our DNA.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Brother Joe. And we'll transition into more audience participation in a second. My intuition is inviting us and inviting me to slow down a little bit. just to slow down. So wherever you are, just settle into your seats. Just really feel your chair and feel your breath. Just gently inhaling and exhaling. We won't do a formal meditation and, close our eyes, but let's just acknowledge our bodies. Acknowledge our bodies connected to other bodies, not just virtually here together, but with our ancestral past. We all breathed. They breathed. We breathe. So the breath is a really powerful way to connect to the ancestors. Just take a deep breath of being and acknowledge Brother Joe's comments and feeling, and Sister Margaret, and that kind of tenderness and heat that comes from having an outpouring of commitment and acknowledgement of the fact that this is a very special moment and needing to act, but also dealing with the horror of responding to these systems that continue to devalue and kill us. So just hold all of that very tenderly. I want to just invite Brother Joel and Sister Margaret one last time. And my colleagues in the audience, please fill the chat with any questions or what some scholars call resonance. So if you're resonating with anything, I see resonance already happening in the chat. But Brother Joel, Sister Margaret, I hear a lot of different recommendations coming from both of you. Any last thoughts around how do we heal from this half a millennia of trauma in the context of the Black diaspora? Any last thoughts that have yet to surface in your mind and heart?
I'd like to say something quickly.
Yes.
Give a plug to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. And it's for two reasons, really. So Brother Joel had mentioned about experiencing, and how do we experience what somebody else is trying to explain to us. And I think that museum is very, very powerful in terms of trying to understand and experience. So, and then just what you just said as well, bringing people together and understanding the trauma. I think the museum will possibly react to what has happened in 2020 and the animation and recognition of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I would hope in the future to see new exhibits which really give a feel to how to, first of all, there's a sense of destiny about this whole thing. Last year was the year of return, which was experienced in Ghana, where many African Americans returned back to Africa, and there were many commemoration experiences and events in the US to commemorate the 400 years. And then this year, we have an explosion of recognition and acknowledgement and validation for the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's kind of sequential, and I think those things will be recorded everywhere, as these webinars seek to hang on and hold on to that power of communal feeling. And I think the exhibits at that museum will also eventually reflect what is happening, this seismic change in validation and acknowledgement of Black Lives Matter and the civil rights movement in general. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Angel, in response to your question, last year at HACSA, there was a team of us that had the privilege of presenting on unleashing the power of unity, building bridges through dialogue. And I want to emphasize the importance of intentionally creating spaces for us to come together and look at how do we bridge the gaps that exist between those of the diaspora and individuals born and living on the continent. When we engaged the conference participants in dialogues about what are those existing gaps, what do we need to do, and resounding comments came forth that we need to get together. While individually we need to heal together. We need to tell each other our truth. We need to dispel the lies that have been told to us through colonization. So I just want to offer, how do we create those spaces intentionally in our communities, in our regions, nationally, to commit to deep conversations about where we are, but where do we want to go? What will support and facilitate the unity that we can draw strength upon?
That's powerful, Sister Margaret. And what I'm going to just to add to that, with those creating those platforms in which we can have dialogue. And what I'm going to recommend that I am doing, which may be a little bit radical, people may say, well, why are you thinking of it this way? So I had to think about personally, how do I feel? So my last name is Ruffin. And we did some tracing our history, and we traced our lineage back to a plantation owned by Edmund Ruffin. So I first had to reconcile my name. And with the ancestry.com, understand how my DNA is structured, 22% British, and we're from Benin and Togo. So in my blood, not only exists the blood of my ancestors, but the blood of my oppressor as well. So I have to reckon on a very biological, molecular level. So what am I trying to achieve? I said to myself, well, what if I could somehow get in contact with those individuals who are from his lineage, from Edmund Ruffin, find them, into dialogue with them, and to learn. I started reading the books that he wrote on agriculture and the soil, and the fact that he was from this group called the Fire Eaters. He was the first one that fired the first shot in the Civil War. I mean, a very, very, very dark individual. But I said to myself, wow, what happened to you that you could hate so much? And has his lineage have a different view today? And can we come together? This is just me personally. I'm not saying you can do this one. Me personally, my personal journey is to make contact with them, to bring this conversation right in the midst of us. Hey, I am, from the continent. You're from, England and from whatever. Let's discuss. Let's get into a dialogue. So I'm looking at creating some type of reconciling conversation with, not only just my African brothers and sisters, but also my British brothers and sisters who were from the side that obviously had committed this horrific action, to see if we can create something different. I'll stop on this though. So when I look at my name, Joel Ruffin, the conflict is in my name. And I look at my son, and my son named, his son, my grandson, he took my middle name and the middle name of his father-in-law, who's, a Syrian Italian, and he named him, Everett Bryan. One to my middle name, and then the middle name of his father-in-law. So his name actually now conveys unity. Not a name which conveys, Joel Ruffin, where you have that kind of dark space there. But the healing has already begun in some sense, because my son didn't see color. Neither will my grandson. Grow up in the context of seeing black and white as I understand it. but he'll be embracing it because that is who he is, the combination of both. So again, my personal journey is going down a path that maybe not conventional, but is a path that I see as a way of really getting to the nitty gritty of where this anger, where this love can potentially heal and reconcile.
Thank you so much for that, Brother Joe. I want to acknowledge you and send you all kinds of energy as you continue your healing journey. And I want to invite the audience now. This is a space for you to take up space. I want to hear your voices. You can ask questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand formally as a participant, and my brother GT will let us know who will raise their hands. I want to just acknowledge that in 1897 in London, the African Society in London is formed and that becomes one of the first institutions to begin to invite the African diaspora to begin to think about Pan-Africanism. So HACSA is in that rich tradition of bringing us together to have this very rich and generative conversation. And this is a seed to many other conversations. So please, I would love to hear the community. We have 20 minutes just to kind of take up space in whatever form we can. You can raise your hand formally. Yes, Brother Lawrence.
Greetings, everyone. I'll try to frame this and raise this question. Thank you so much, first of all, for your voices. Just thank you for being in this space. Healing, I've long believed that probably the most, one of the most lethal weapons that perpetuates what I call epistemic apartheid. It's this notion of apartheid, right? Within curriculum, within education. Our voices, our stories, our narratives, our history really don't matter to earn degrees in the United States. We're electives, we're not required. And I believe that one of the symptoms of our woundedness, if you will, is the fact that we just don't know each other. We're actually taught to hate ourselves, not only through formal education, but through the way other mediums of communication and culture in the U.S. and globally, quite frankly, causes us to think about ourselves in ways that are in alignment with a racist dominant narrative, right? We're less than. Our histories don't really count. In fact, we're not even taught to even deconstruct the messages that we get through Tarzan movies and other kinds of images about who we are historically. So my question is, what do we need to do to begin to take control over how we are taught to remember and kind of reconnect? How we continue to send our children to schools that are, quite frankly, that really perpetuate curricula that are not controlled by us. And so it reinforces this this myth of white supremacy. You may remember that Martin Delany and others in the 19th century actually argued for segregated, David Walker and others, for segregated educational systems because they wanted to control how we were teaching our children. What are your thoughts about the role of education and our role to help us remember, to deconstruct what we've been taught so we can construct something very different, very new, very life-giving? I think that's a critical issue for us, and I'd like to know what your thoughts are about that.
Yes. Brother Lawrence, it's such a powerful question. We can have 10 other webinars to respond to that. I want to give one of us the opportunity to respond immediately, and then I want to allow other participants in the town hall to take up space. But we can continue with the spirit of that question. So anybody would like to respond, Joel or Margaret?
Well, what I would like to just immediately say is that at the conference last year, when we were talking about what is it that would close the gap strategies, the number one thing that came out was changing our educational system, really looking at our history and allowing those of us in education, policymakers, how do we come together and look at what that truth is, record it, and how does it change not just what we learn, but the way we learn?
And I'll add just some historical anecdotes to acknowledge Brother Lawrence's question. Integration failed to integrate the curriculum. integration failed to integrate the curriculum. So you took Black schools that were actually high performing and doing well before integration, forced students to go into white schools, bust them, and then experience the backlash and the hate that came from that integration. And then the curriculum was never integrated. So you have a whole generation that experienced all kinds of wounding. So the integration of the curriculum is major. But I also want to acknowledge that what also happened is there was a massive kind of furloughing of Black teachers. So that if you look at the teaching workforce right now across the country, 80 to 85% of the teaching workforce is white and female. However, in many of the urban schools, the population is almost 70% students of color. In the context of New York City, you know, segregation is so vivid because our public schools are predominantly populated by students of color. Yet again, the teachers compose almost 90% of the teaching workforce. So you have this structure. We have these white teachers teaching these babies of color, and then many of the teachers don't have the skill set to really affirm and validate their lived experience. Not to say all of them can't, but the very structure of our school system reinforces the lack of integration that begins in 1954. So just to give some kind of history there. I want to invite Busi to contribute, please.
Thank you for, I mean, this has been very insightful, and I want to thank the organizers for this. For me, I'm half Ugandan, half South African, and my mom experienced apartheid, and I grew up in Zambia. So my dad was also involved in helping. He was an attorney there, but he participated in helping South Africans while in Zambia, and that helped with the struggle. Fast forward, I remember people living with pseudonames, and then post-apartheid, I learned their other names, you know. And for me particularly, I've lived in America for about 20 years. And my dad was also a student activist during Idi Amin's. He fled Idi Amin's regime. So that has been part of my DNA. My family has been involved in the struggle in South Africa as well as, you know. And fast forward, I felt the need to immerse myself into the Black community in America. I came out of college at a time when there was a hiring freeze, and with Smith Barney, and I was an intern, and I said they asked me if I wanted to work with Citibank. I said yes. They gave me two options: work at 399 Park or work on 14th Street on Harlem, since there was a hiring freeze and they were owned by the same company. I said I wanted to work in Harlem because I wanted to understand banking in the inner city. And for me, that opened my eyes to a lot, and the disparities in banking. 98% of people of color were denied loans, and the products that were given were not, I didn't feel they were appropriate. Lots of people had bad credit from maybe even when they go to community colleges. I remember I did the class at LaGuardia before I went to college here, just to understand the American education system. One thing I noticed, as soon as someone turns 17, you're given 18 or so, credit cards. Your credit is messed up. And I learned from also immersing myself in the community, becoming close with, because I was a manager with my community. Healthcare debts was another factor, because you didn't qualify for Medicaid because of your income. At the same time, you didn't qualify you couldn't afford health insurance. That stays on your record for many years.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people would then also child supports, how high it is. And so sometimes people end up deciding not to work because for them, they get frustrated and they end up not, so it becomes something that also holds down. And there was a payroll. Now I moved to an economic development corporation where I was a I was a liaison between fiscal and HR. So I saw the child support checks, the garnishments. And I saw that in itself was also another crippling element,
Yeah.
And sometimes a bit these stereotypes of African-American community being lazy, and yet it's bigger than that.
Yes.
And once you understand it, and rather than being a part of a judgment, what I decided to do, which was beyond my scope, was maybe enlightening some of my clients on how to clean up their credit. And they didn't know anything about the credit houses.
Yes.
There's so many of them. And then I went to
Newark. There's so much. Sister Busi, I just want to honor your story, not to interrupt you.
Yes.
I just want to honor your story. So just allowing some time to just let you really resonate with the community, because part of this moment in this community, we just want to share so much. And I want to hear you. I want to hear every single word you say. I also want to respect time.
Yes.
And so just thank you so much for sharing just not only your life trajectory in the context of the industry you worked in, but just what you saw and how what you saw just reinforced just a legacy of structural inequality. But I do want to create some time.
Absolutely.
Yes. But thank you, Sister Busi. Sister Ophelia. Are you still there? Ophelia? We wanted to create some time to allow, so just sitting with what Sister Busi just said and what's coming up in the chat. Anybody else? We have about 10 minutes, so I want to create opportunity for more folks to share, but in the same spirit of Sister Busi, who has such an experience in the banking sector. Anyone else would like to share? Cesar, please.
Thank you again for convening us today and for all the amazing comments that have really helped me as well situate my own healing. So I just finished a career in corporate law and flew to South Africa to heal. So I've dedicated all of COVID to doing the practices and to doing the things that my body needs in order to recuperate from consuming so many stimuli from the white world to define myself. And I allowed that to happen because I wanted to thrive in that space. But having been retired from all of that for 4 months and just focusing on my nutrition, my yoga practice, my meditation, and just healing my body has done so much already for my psyche, has done so much for my spirit, has done so much for defining what kind of life I want to lead moving forward. So I just wanted to put a light on nutrition, a light on our bodies, a light on our breathing, a light on our movement, because that is ultimately what's going to propel us to heal collectively from the struggle.
Yes. So I just want to acknowledge this kind of dual return. It's a dual. It's almost like a three-prong return. One, a return to the motherland, right? And HACSA and Ambassador Hispanica has created a really wonderful opportunity to do that. And then a return to ourselves that Sister Margaret Spearman has talked about, really starting with the self. And then in that, a return to our bodies, return to the body. So thank you for lifting that up, Cesar. Anyone else? Thank you, Cesar. Thank you, Sister Busi. This is a seed of a conversation to what's going to happen in the HACSA 2021 summit, and a seed of many other conversations. But I'll just, as you decide whether you want to contribute or not, I want to say this, that as Sister Busi and Brother Cesar and Brother Lawrence, how they took up space in a community like this, a few things happen on a psychological and neurological level. One, the energy that they, in expressing what they're expressing, and of course, imbued with just like this wrestling of with the healing or the trauma. One, that that energy gets transferred out of the body, expressed in the collective. The collective holds it and resonates with it, right? So we kind of feel what they feel. And many of us have been feeling what each other feel for years. So that mirroring is just crucial. And so that's one very strong tactic that supports with healing, is creating spaces for mirroring, creating spaces to allow Sister Busi, for example, to take up space. This is what I went through. This is what I saw. Because in many cases, she hasn't been given that opportunity. So we need to create spaces for us to take up space. And that's one step to healing. I will get to structural change at some point, because we can't just heal the body and the mind. We got to change the institutions that reproduce the very harm that has been happening for several centuries. Let's have, is Brother Hugh Kwarshi. Let's hear your voice.
Okay, let me just unmute first. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a quick observation. There was a comment made by Hakim Belosagi in one of his contributions to a seminar that he didn't realize that he was an African until he went to university and mixed with other Africans from different parts of the continent. Echoing that, or very similar to that, there was at the last HACSA conference when we went to the Royal Century, and thank you very much, Ambassador Swanica, for organizing that. One of our African American friends suggested that the gift that African Americans had given to Africa was the idea of Africa. That Africans had been taken from different parts, they've been deliberately denied their own language, it was a system of divide and rule, but collectively they had almost created and perhaps to some extent mythologized the idea of Africa. Now, the problem that each of us has is in deciding how to prioritize our education. Is it more important to read Jane Austen, or is it important to read an African novelist, Mabonkou, for example? And the problem that every individual has, no matter what society is, negotiating between your hardwired self and your social self, your id and your superego, if you will. But my question is, if we don't know what it is to be an African, then we're still playing into the idea of that division. We're divided by language, we're divided by religion, whether religion has been a healing or whether it's been a dividing influence, whether it's been a red herring. And it seems to me that there is still some way to go before we can perhaps have confidence that to be African doesn't necessarily mean you have to be something else. You have to become something else. I just wanted to suggest that part of being an African was to celebrate the fact that you could choose what you wanted to be.
Yeah. I see Brother Joe wanted to respond. Before I let Hugh go, I want to make sure that everybody who speaks moving forward introduces themselves. Could you briefly introduce yourself, Hugh?
Yeah, my name is Hugh Kwashi. I'm an actor director. I'm based in London. You might have seen me in a Star Wars film once, but more recently in The Murder of Stephen Lawrence, I played Neville. But yes, I've been acting for some decades now, and I'm close to Ambassador Swanica and her husband Tommy, also a Ghanaian, born in Ghana.
Thank you so much, Brother Joe, and then we'll have Zenobia.
Brother Hugh, it's so good to see you, and you are certainly a gift to our people and a gift to the world. So good to see you, my friend. I scientifically, to be African is human. All life began in the continent. The truth of the matter is that Europeans are our cousins. They're African. African is a word that we associate with the notion of being a human being. I mean, so scientifically, there's really not that much difference. If you take a brain of an African and a brain of a European, you take them outside, there's the brain. So the question is, at what point, do you want to assess your reality? And so do we operate in the labels, or do we operate in just the facts and the truth? Look, if a lamb goes to the Lion University, the lamb can expect to learn about itself. If a lamb works in a lion bank or institutions created by a lion, it's going to be hard pressed to learn about itself. I mean, a lamb will be, not only part of the institution, but it can also be the meal of the lion. So a lamb has to create its own. And so we're demanding of a lion to be something that is not. I can't demand a lion to feel for what it's like to be African when it doesn't really know it's African, first, number one. And number two, it has no connection with what it means to be a lamb. So I think the notion of source becomes really important. And to Brother Hugh, your point, we are who we say we are. We can't be confined by labels. The labels constrict the possibilities of what's possible. The gift of the African is life itself. Everyone who's breathing should be faking us.
Thank you for that, Brother Joel. Thank you for that. I want to honor time, so we'll have Zenobia. Zenobia, please share, and then I want to create some time and then Brother Charles Kojo, and then we'll have some time for Ambassador Svanicki to make some concluding remarks, and I may provide some closing framing. But Sister Zenobia.
Thank you. So quickly, I just wanted to connect on and reiterate for me that one of the most significant pieces that I continuously hear in different formats is this three-part return, this return to home, return to ourselves, and return to our bodies. And that is a simultaneous and ongoing experience that you have, and that as I too was a participant on the in the conference last year, and one of the main pieces, as we talked about One Africa, as we talked about one human race, it really helped us to focus in on the home part and on ourselves. And then as I listened to Dr. Spearman throughout the years, many years of just focus and wisdom around our bodies as well. And so I just wanted to emphasize that that we not neglect the impact that this has. We know it scientifically, we know it personally, and we know it collectively that it has on our bodies, and the necessity for us to address again all these the trifold area of home, cells, and bodies. And I also want to thank the panel just for such insightful wisdom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zenobia. I want to create space for Anne, and for those of you who need to transition, just know that we'll be closing formally at 11:15 Eastern time, so in 15 minutes. So we'll have some time to listen to each other a little more. Anne, please.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
So just to share maybe two things that, I heard so many things that I could relate to, and that started the thought process in me. And there I come again to the topic, the thought process, because something that Cesar Francia, is that how you say, what you said about, for me, it's quite intense to be in this group, I have to say. Mm-hmm. First of all, this me coming with a very different lineage from a very different background, So, but what you said about that you realized you tried to be part of something and you started to eat that information and it didn't fit. And for me, it's a question that is with me for some time now. I had the luck to have a wonderful conversation with Angel, and he will also be a speaker in some of the formats that we organize. And this, integration in itself, I have a big question mark about this, because I realize more and more that what does it mean, integration into what? It's about meeting, and then it becomes really intense. It's not about integration into a system. It's about a certain heritage that people bring, and this ingredient can be part of something new that you create together. And it comes painfully to me because I come from a cultural place where to relate to life from a very mental place, scientific place, and that comes at the cost of feeling things. And so therefore, it's easy to think this is the way life looks, but there's a whole reality underneath. And so for me, it's a big question, this is something, then it really, I feel this is where it gets real, like how can different ingredients meet? And then it's totally unknown, I have to say.
Yeah.
And I can say that what shaped me, there is a lot missing here, a lot. And that's just a very short, a small part of life. And it's something's missing.
No, thank you so much, Sister Anne. And I want to acknowledge you and the organization that you represent, the Pocket Project. And the Pocket Project really does a lot of work. I won't do it justice, but really helping folks think about intergenerational trauma and doing that with deep work. So we'll talk to Ambassador Svaneker. Maybe one day we can do something in partnership. But I also want to acknowledge you as probably the only white person, or at least identified as white person in this room, that it is important that you witness this, partly because whiteness can benefit from a people trying to regain their sense of consciousness.
Absolutely.
Our freedom is tied to yours. So the more free we are, the more free you are. Who else would like to contribute? Yes, Brother Charles Kojo, yes.
Hello, thank you for having me in this wonderful group. It's a real an honor to be here. So what I would like to contribute on is the
Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So my name is Charles Kolo, and I'm part of the leadership team at a startup here in Ghana. We are leading the payment systems in Ghana, and we are taking the product to other countries as well. We do a lot of wonderful work, and I'm here with my wife. And we just moved to Ghana actually a year ago from the US. So you hear from my accent that I'm French as well. So I have an identity that is French, but also my wife will make fun of me because I also associate myself to being an American, and we live in Atlanta for some time. I understand the African American struggle from my perspective. And the thing is that when I was in the US, actually, and in France, and I worked in Canada, I have the luxury to do a lot of things. And I realized that that the more I was learning to be the best in this, in Europe, in the US, and all these things, and I felt like I wasn't, I was replicating the system. So there's a situation where we have a lot of very successful people in this group right now. And the question was, okay, so I'm building companies, working in startups in the US, in large corporations, but I'm recreating the thing that I'm fighting against. So I'm mad at the system where I'm hiring people to replicate this situation of oppression that we can face right now, and we try to change. So the big question that I asked myself with my wife was, okay, so is it the life that I want to build right now? Is it how I want to raise my kids? I can live in the US, I can live in France, I can live in Ghana, I can live in Taiwan. I mean, I have the luxury to have this education that I learned from these different schools. But the thing is that I realized that I was replicating something that I was against. So it's just like a self-destructing activity where I tried to recreate a system, but that I'm recreating a system that I worked so hard to try to change. So that's my contribution that I wanted to bring, because that's something that I had to cut when I decided to come to Africa, and I discovered a lot of wonderful things with HACSA and the Ambassador Svaneker, because I had to change something at the core, and I didn't want to keep building a system that would play against me.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that, Brother Charles Kojo, and inviting us to all think about how we may have some contradicting ways of relating to the systems in which we are embedded in. I can resonate with that, and I saw a lot of resonance in the chat. I want to honor time, so we do have space for maybe one or two more comments. But I think I want to honor Ambassador Zvanike. She is the force that brought us together, and although she is in human form, obviously, I kind of see her really as an archetype of the motherland, really calling us back, whispering, come. And in this case, virtually, but in a broader sense, a psychological return to our land, to our place, to our home. So I want to create some space for her to take up space, Ambassador. Any thoughts from you before we transition into closing?
I don't want to take up any space at all. In everything you said, the mother part is what I identify with. Yes, I am a mother. I think that's my strongest identity. I see exciting, interesting people on the chat who I'd love to hear from. So I want to give all the time to people to speak. I'm so excited how well this has gone. I think this format is much better than what the format we did before. And I think we'll continue with this format. I love the town hall feel. There's Nana Yao Asamoah, there's Lord Paul Boateng, there's the Honorable Bell Riberia MP, joining us. I don't know if Ophelia, I've tried to reach out to Ophelia. I don't know whether she can hear us, but she wanted to ask a question. There's Keith Stokes, all the way from Rhode Island. Very excited to see you join us. Novita Ruffin, who visited Ghana in the year of return. Theodora Richter, who is the chairman of HACSA USA. Delighted to let you know that HACSA USA has been officially recognized as a charity in the US. So Laverne Clark, who interned for HACSA, she's probably the youngest person on the chat at the moment. So I'd love to hear from any of these people or anyone else who would like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. There's one question by Sister Grace, and I can read it, but Sister Grace, if you'd like to grace us with your voice, would you ask it? Yes. Would you ask her question?
Yeah. Hello, family. Hello. I'm still sitting in the word walking wounded. And it's, what does healing really look like, you know?
Yeah.
I have 2 daughters, and it seems like every day you turn on the news, you relive it. So help me.
Brother Lawrence, and then we'll have Sister Terry. Brother Lawrence, any thoughts on that?
It's a powerful question. And by the way, I'm Larry Burnley. I'm at the University of Dayton. I'm a historian, but I'm a chief diversity officer there. And Margaret Spearman's brother. Anyway, I think in part, Sister Grace, in terms of what healing looks like, I guess for me, it's actually loving all that I am, understanding who I am, and loving my Black skin, thick nose, nappy hair, loving my history, connecting with that. It's really rooted in love. That's what healing looks like, I think. And I think that's kind of fundamentally kind of, where hopefully we're moving towards, seeing ourselves and regaining the truth about who we are. Thank you, Brother Larry. And I want to hold the spirit of that question and hold grace for a little longer, just to kind of just sense, because I think we all feel that. I want to also invite Tara Carrington to ask make the last comment or last question before I kind of wrap us up. Tara?
Hi, my name is Terry Carrington. I will just say I'm a nurse. I was invited here by Grace, but I'm also an NP. So I see patients, and I also teach at a university. And one thing that I had to even, like, there was something that you said in the beginning, Dr. Acosta, that kind of really resonated with me. But just being able to understand what you're actually feeling and being able to sit in that space, because it took me about almost a month to even address the George Floyd situation. And I was just, I'm feeling like this. I wonder how my students are feeling. And I took it upon myself to invite the Black students in particular to talk to them about how they were feeling. And the fact that we all came together and just talked about it, that helped to, I guess, to start the healing. I'm not saying we're fully there, but that we acknowledged it, I think something that helped us to feel a little better in dealing with everything. And then the fact that I'm introduced to this group, I didn't know, I mean, I guess the fact that we're not alone, we're all feeling this together, I think that can help to promote the healing too. So it's not being alone in what we're feeling. I think that's a first step.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge some of the brain science that is coming out of the last 20 years, that when we can find a word that can describe a feeling we're having or a phenomenon, that's called cognitive reframing or cognitive labeling. And that act, just opens up so many possibilities in terms of being able to understand how to continue to heal. I want to thank the panel and invite them very briefly, maybe to share a closing thought, a word. Brother Joe, Brother Margaret, Sister Margaret, please. Any last thought, any last word, any last sentiments that are with you right now?
The spirit that I experience in this platform encourages me to continue the work and to create those spaces, whether it's my space or create spaces with others that will allow us to heal together. Ubuntu. Ubuntu. I am because we are. The connectivity that is so paramount in this work.
Thank you so much, sister.
Thank you.
Brother Joel.
Thank you.
To my sister Grace, and to everyone, it's good to see you. And thank you for that passionate question. Healing begins with knowing that you have to be healed. The we awareness versus self-awareness. And when we become that aware, then there's an opportunity to put on that lens of compassion, to be able to have that self-reflection of how the hurts are impacting my decisions and what level of expectations I need to reset. So healing actually begins with a very question, and that's self-exploration. And I would say this, an answer to that is in your very name, grace. When we become grace to the world, when we can become grace and compassion with power, love, and a sound mind. And that's in you. So even in our tears, those tears are tears of strength and resolve and love. So keep asking, keep inquiring, because the answer that you're looking for is you.
Both grace, Clark, and then the grace that our people have demonstrated in the modern world of going through so much suffering and yet still being graceful. And that is there's something there, that the grace that we can communicate to the modern world. And thank you, Grace, for that last tender question. I want to end where we began, that this conversation, HACSA, is part of that long lineage of conversations around Pan-Africanism, about negritude, about Black power, about Black lives mattering. And I want to encourage you to come back. We can't solve the problem in one webinar, so we want to invite you back, not just to HACSA 2021, but also to future conversations about this topic and the many other topics that Ambassador Svanike has been able to curate. With that being said, it was a pleasure to being part of this process. And Thank you, Ambassador, for inviting us. I let you close us out.
Yes, I'd just like to say, for me, what resonated the strongest is that we are not alone. This webinar is created to have that communal grieving and sharing and support. And we want to continue to have this platform to feel connected. It's so important that we are connected. The other thing is, for everyone here, you have 10, 20, 100 people in your network. So reach out to them with some of the messages you've received here today about connectedness and supporting each other, and also bringing people in, something which Angel had said in the last preparation for the webinar, was calling people in, not out. And that is one of the things HACSA seeks to do, to create bridges with other communities and bring them in for the good of the whole community, not just the Black community, because you might be surprised that there are people who don't belong directly to the Black community, but who are also injured and who also need healing. And usually aggression and bullying are the product of that, of hurting. And so this is an opportunity for us all to reach out back into our communities and bring people in and connect people. Thank you very much all for participating, and particularly thank you to the technical team, Angel Acosta, Charles Colo, George Thomas, Savanikia, Rebecca Ford, who has been a pillar of support, and really everyone who has made this webinar possible, our panelists, Joel, Margaret, and Angel again. And we look forward to rejoining again in this format next month. And it'll be about the impact of the COVID-19 on the Black community and the comparisons between the treatment of COVID in Africa and the treatment of COVID in the diaspora. Thank you all. See you again very soon. Bye-bye.